What happens if I say no?
All right.
Put some pants on.
I'm never ready.
All right. This week's episode was 16 Out of the Pit. And they covered Genesis 41 through 50, which was the end of Genesis. And they went through that last part pretty quick. They only really covered like the first 2 chapters. And then they were like, oh, here's the rest of it. Just a little snippet of summary.
More than half was review.
Yeah. Yeah, more like the beginning 10, 15 minutes of the review. Every time I go to listen to it in the afternoon and make notes, I'm just like,
here we go.
I don't want to do this. It's like I like just listening to it in the moment. I don't like taking notes and thinking about it again. I just want to listen to it in the moment and think about it. But I always love this chapter 41, because he goes through Pharaoh's dreams. And I always love the dreams. I love the interpretation, and I love, I guess, the end result being Joseph coming out on top of the situation. So in Genesis chapter 41, I'm not going to read all of it. I'm just going to read through verse 7. It says, when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. And then Pharaoh woke up, and it had been a dream. So I thought it was interesting that the cows came out of the Nile River, which is their source of water, which should prevent them from having a famine in their land, because the Nile River floods every so often. And, it's like clockwork, so they're always counting on it. And, Abraham went to Egypt because there's always plenty there. We know that Isaac did not go. Did Jacob ever go to Egypt?
No.
No. Because he was
I don't
told
think
not
he did. Okay. So he was told not to.
They were all in denial.
Wah, wah, wah.
No likes for you, Ray.
Well, I would say if I was interpreting the dream, how I would have interpreted it would have been a whole lot better, and I probably would have lost my head too. I would have told Pharaoh, you got 7 fat wives and 7 ugly wives, and they don't like you. They would have want my head.
Your 7 ugly wives are going to eat your 7 fat wives.
Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting that the root word for reeds was brothers.
Yeah.
And how Marty was kind of like alluding to how Joseph would have seen this dream. But I kept thinking, like, why would Joseph know so much about his parents' lives? Like, I'm sure that he knew that Jacob worked for Rachel for 14 years, worked for Leah for 7, got tricked into it. But why would he know that his stepmom Leah was not attractive at that time?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. I thought that was strange, but
when it got into that part of the whole discussion, he's saying that only God interprets dreams, and then Joseph just jumps in and interprets.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like there was way too much conjecture in this discussion, and it seemed like it was trying to fit his narrative, not let the Bible have its own narrative.
Mm-hmm.
That there was just way too much conjecture when he got into some of that, and I felt like he spent way too much time on that and could have covered a little more of the rest of the book. So that was, I found a little bit discouraging, because when he says that only God interprets dreams, and then how did Joseph interpreted himself, because if you knew the significance and you could interpret it, But I thought that just leaves God out of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought the point was God's the one who is going to raise up Joseph out of the pit. God's the one who's going to provide for the Israel and all that. And so it just that bothered me, and I didn't appreciate it or didn't enjoy it as much as some of the others. Now in the end, I liked the way it ended with the whole idea of
Judah.
Yeah, Judah and people being faithful and what it looks like being faithful. And it's not perfect, but it's people that that come out on top by not doing not taking the route like Cain or Jacob, but so anyway, that was my big take on it.
Yeah, it came back around at the end and kind of, I guess, tied it up with a neat bow, just saying that what you said, that they were kind of trusting the story and forgiveness is the answer and not revenge.
Yeah.
Well, if you put this in modern terms, you think about this. This is Joseph, a convicted sex offender, even though he didn't do it, is promoted to vice president of the country. I mean, that would be like a sex offender then being in prison for that long and then being promoted to vice president. I mean, that's a huge jump. I mean, just in society alone for someone who had been in prison. But I think, only God could have done that, because your typical everyday prisoner would probably not make much of their life after getting out of prison. So with the interpretation of the dream of, Pharaoh, how he got promoted, I think it was pretty astonishing.
Yeah, I think with
it makes me think about, like what you said, makes me think about the cultural differences, because now we have a democracy and how with them, Pharaoh was essentially the king, right?
Yeah,
they could do whatever they wanted, so it didn't really matter, and nobody could question him. It wasn't a democracy. There was no whatever. He just did what he wanted to.
Right. Exactly.
So I think in that situation it'd be very different. Like in America, that would never fly, of course. But I did hear a thing today about democracy versus theocracy. It was really good. Talking about democracy, how the people are sovereign, but in theocracy, God is sovereign. It was a really good little point, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, I think what you were talking about, Mark, how they were putting a lot of meaning into things. I think it was because he said that the same word for the sleek or well-favored cows was the same word that was used to describe Rachel.
Right.
So maybe that's why he was putting so much into Joseph, looking back on that situation. But I think for Joseph's situation, it's more interesting that the root word of the reeds was brothers, because he wasn't eaten by his brothers, but his title was taken away by his brothers. His future as his future as the Behor was taken by his brothers. So I think it'd be interesting to him that these cows who were sleek and fat were eaten by the ones who were gaunt and ugly. And I just wonder how long, Joseph thought about his brothers after being gone. Like, how long did he think about them every day? Did he eventually say, I'm never going to see these guys again? Because then when they meet up later, it's just a very emotional reunion.
Yeah.
Even though it seems like he's headed toward vengeance at first, he kind of, I just wonder if he saw the outcome of his vengeance and he just did not like it at all. Like, he didn't like what the outcome could have been for his brothers, even though they did what they did to him.
Right. Yeah, I think it's impressive that Joseph was about 17 when he was sold into slavery. So, now he's 19, 20 years old. And that's just kind of blows my mind that he had that kind of faith in God, because he didn't, when Potiphar's wife went after him, for a 17, 18-year-old boy to not fall for a hot woman, that out of conviction, because there was nobody who was going to tell him he couldn't do that. There wasn't anybody. No one's going to go tell his dad, or no one was going to, and that he maintained his faith in God, even though he spent that time in prison and he was mistreated and all those things. I think it's inspiring, and I know it, when I was 17 years old, that wouldn't have been, I wouldn't have made the story.
Yeah,
I'd been a tragedy.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I would have been in jail I would have been guilty and in jail.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just, while you were saying that, I was thinking, like, even if he was 21, it would still be difficult to turn her down. She's in a position of power. If he had slept with her, would they have been able to get rid of Potiphar and he could have replaced him somehow? You know what I mean? It's like, does she retain power if her husband passes away, and it can be passed on to somebody else? I don't know if it's the same as other monarchies, but I could see not only an attractive woman, but maybe a position that would come out of it.
I don't know. I think her attractiveness is into question. I mean, if she was pretty, yeah, there's temptation. If she was ugly, was there temptation? That was why it was easy for him to turn her down. But
I don't know.
But you assume the Pharaoh, if it's Pharaoh's wife, surely, because it wasn't probably.
Well, it was Potiphar.
That we think of. He probably picked her, because she probably maybe not.
Yeah.
And it probably wasn't her first time trying to go after a slave, because the fact that she was able to be upfront and forward about it said that this is a habit she had.
Yeah.
Could be. But I'm just impressed that he's remained faithful no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And because, I look at our situations in our lives, we are so situational in our faithfulness that, if things are going well, then I'm faithful. But if things are getting hard, then I feel, immediately abandoned.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
And it makes it easier to give in to things.
Yeah. Yeah. And so why not go do something stupid? Because I'm not, it's not paying off being faithful.
Yeah.
So that has always been a point of Joseph's life that I felt was just incredible.
Yeah. When I was a teenager, they always said, make the decision before you get in the backseat of the car. By the time you get in the backseat of the car, you ain't thinking about nothing.
Yeah, there's no decision. The decision's already been made.
It's too late at that point. So man, the fact that he was aware of the situation, because sometimes you find yourself in that position and not realize it. But not so much like that, but pretty much any temptation. That he was able to be aware that, hey, this could be bad compromise.
Yeah.
I wonder what the difference was between Joseph and his brothers, because Joseph, it seems like, has this at least awareness, right, of God. I can't do that. I'm not going to do that. But his brothers, on the other hand, seem like, yeah, let's kill him. No big deal.
That's it.
I wonder why.
That's a good point.
Yeah, they didn't step back from doing something they shouldn't be doing, and Joseph took a moment to think.
But it makes you also wonder about the influence of the mother.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think Judah was the main one behind wanting to get rid of him, because Reuben was still trying to, I guess, buy time, try to save his brother.
Yeah.
And then, that's why they have this whole story of Judah and Tamar and, him being proven that he's not as righteous as his daughter-in-law is. I thought it was interesting that kind of what Ray was talking about earlier, how, Ray mentioned he would have given a good report about the dream, and Joseph didn't pull any punches with his interpretation. He just told Pharaoh flat out, like, look, you're going to have 7 good years and 7 bad years. And, it was, I don't know. I don't think I would have had a plan to present him, with like a solution to the problem.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where God's in the picture.
Yeah.
It wasn't Joseph who interpreted the dream, and it wasn't Joseph who came up with the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's all. That's where God stepped in.
Yeah.
I think about would you guys have patience enough to wait 7 years before the famine came to go, okay, Joseph was right? I mean, because you think they had 7 years of abundance before, which was completeness or wholeness. And then Pharaoh had to wait 7 years to find out, was this really going to happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I think,
Pharaoh had to have some faith and trust in what he was being told for him to even go with it, because he had to wait 7 years for this to even be really fulfilled.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would have been one of those dreams that would have haunted him.
Yeah.
Because I don't see Pharaoh just having faith that, Joseph is telling the truth, unless he really felt like this dream was terrifying to me. And I don't understand it at all, and the not understanding part is terrifying also. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was pretty amazing that I think it said that Pharaoh saw God's spirit in Joseph, and just for him to notice that God's spirit was with him or in him. I don't know exactly what it says off the top of my head, but I had never noticed that before or given thought to it or anything.
Yeah. I think to me, that's the point, is in these stories, the hero of the story is not Joseph. The hero of the story is God.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And, all along in every story, we often raise these guys up as these incredible heroes, but the hero of the story is always God. And anyway.
One thing. Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say, the thing that stood out to me is, for some reason they were trying to make Joseph out as if he was this egotistical, selfish brat, and that probably with his brothers he was a brat. But you can see, or at least I can see, throughout the entire story, Joseph has some kind of relationship with God.
Yeah.
The fact that he can trust God to interpret this guy's dream properly in a split second.
Mm-hmm.
You don't do that haphazardly, because that could have meant his life. So, and like I said, that there's something to that relationship between Joseph and God, and the only place he can learn that is in his father's tent. And obviously his relationship with God was different from his brother's relationship with God, and I guess that comes from being favored, that he was able to develop his relationship with God based on what he saw Jacob's relationship with God, and no one else.
Of course, that might have say something about the influence his mother had.
Yeah.
Because he had different mothers.
Yeah.
And the other brothers didn't get it. I don't know what Benjamin was like.
Do we know the age difference between Benjamin and Joseph?
I don't know.
Because he died when Benjamin was born. So how much time did she have to influence him?
Yeah.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. I'm not saying that she didn't.
Right.
We don't have a timeline.
That's
but we
true.
know he wouldn't have gotten that influence from Leah. But it shows how important it is to have that relationship with God when you're in a position you need to make decisions. That constant contact, and that's why I think that's the thing to take away, is that the importance of that relationship. But there are many lessons we can take away from the story of Joseph, and that's just one of them.
Yeah, I did like how he was pointing out the pattern in Joseph's life. You know how in the beginning he was given the extra coat by his dad, and
Right.
then he had a dream, and then the coat was taken away, and then he was thrown into a pit, and then the next one was kind of, the dream part was kind of weird, but it was like Potiphar gives Joseph gifts and raises him up to a position, and then Potiphar's wife has dreams or aspirations to sleep with Joseph, and then he's stripped of his coat and thrown into a pit again. And he was saying how the word pit should have been prison, but I guess in the text it was the same word, pit, so it wasn't. I guess it was to make that correlation between those two stories. But then Joseph gets pulled from the pit again and gets clothes put on, and then he interprets dreams, and then he's lifted into a position of power. So it was kind of opposite from the beginning, which makes me think there must be a chiasm in there somewhere, but I didn't go digging around for it because it was going A, B, C, D, D, B, D, C, B, A, which makes me think there must be something in there, but I didn't go digging around.
Yeah, there was a little bit of a parallel symbolism going on, between the dream, the 7 ugly cows or the skinny cows and the 7 beautiful, cows, kind of referencing, Jacob's 2 wives, Rachel and Leah. Whereas Joseph was cast down into the well, the pit, didn't have water in it, and by the brothers from Leah, basically, so I never would have made that connection, and but also too, going back, about Joseph, after he had interpreted the dream in chapter 41, verse 38, and in 37, the Pharaoh, the proposal pleased Pharaoh, when Joseph came up with this plan to appoint people to oversee the surplus. And he said, the proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And he said to them, can we find anyone like this, a man who has God's spirit in him? So he was impacted, by Joseph. And like Mark said, Joseph wasn't the hero of the stories. The hero is God. And all throughout the scripture, it says that God determined, and that the dream was interpreted by God, and I thought it was interesting that they kind of did a lot of supposition here, a lot of what ifs. What if Joseph, he saw what had happened to the cupbearer and the baker. One gets raised up and the other one gets impaled on a pole. And now he's standing like Stephen said, this could go really good or it could go really bad and I could die.
Yeah.
When he knew the interpretation of the dream, he could have said, well, you know what, this means that everything is going to be great and you don't have to worry, you're a great king and you're going to live forever. He could have, he could have really sugarcoated it, and, but he was chosen. He was chosen for this reason, to save not only Israel, but the world probably. And how God chose this really dysfunctional family. I mean, when you're going to kill your brother, you hate him that bad, and then somebody says, "Hey, hold on, let's not kill him. He is our brother. Let's just sell him into slavery." Now, whose intent was to come back later, but so he was clearly distraught when he came back and didn't find him there, and only to find out that he had been sold into slavery, and which clearly wasn't his intent. He was, but God chose his family. And because they had a passion for God, and God says, I can do something with you guys, because they valued something. They valued God, and clearly he's. I mean, like I think what was it Ray said. How could this story have turned out the way that it did? How could Joseph go from the prison, the worst, the guttermost, and rise up to the level of power, being second in command of all of Egypt, the mightiest country in the world at the time? I mean, who would have thought if it weren't God?
Well, that's one of the things I was reading down on too, was that when the famine did happen, the whole world came to get grain from Joseph. They all went to Egypt to get grain because the famine that was there was throughout the known world where they were at. And, it just kind of reminded me of what, God had said to Abraham, I will bless all nations through you. And here is, a fulfillment of that, because he's blessing all nations around Egypt through Abraham's seed, making, Joseph this caretaker of the entire world. And if it wasn't for Joseph really wanting to follow God and follow through with God's plan, that couldn't have taken place. It's just that Joseph was willing to listen and put God's plan into practice, and he was able to bless the whole world at that point in time, and to be at the right place at the right time too. And so, that was just right at the end of chapter 41.
That made me think of, Ray? Made me wonder if, because, there's so much of Jesus in the Old Testament, right?
Yeah.
And you think about God getting Joseph to where he needed to be in Egypt, so that out of Egypt he could save the whole world, so that he could, basically give them bread, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about Joseph going to Egypt, coming out of Egypt with Jesus to essentially save the whole world. I don't know if that's a reach, but it's interesting.
Well, there have been studies on Joseph and Jesus, the comparisons.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's not that big of a stretch.
Well, you got Jesus going to be killed, and so what does God do? He sends them to Egypt. So from Egypt, then he calls them out of Egypt to come back, from Egypt. You just think about how, with Jesus, why would God have sent them to Egypt? Out of all the places that God has always told them don't go, why would God send his own self to Egypt and then to come out of?
Yeah. What's crazy about it, though, too, is that who killed Joseph killed him. His brothers killed him.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mm-hmm. They had to bring him out of the pit so that he could go to Egypt and become the king, or become the second in charge. I think there's probably a lot of.
Well, and then you think about Herod, Jew, his brothers are trying to kill him. His descendant brothers are trying to kill him, and so he's told to leave and go to, he's sent to Egypt.
Yeah, some pretty cool stuff.
I did think it was interesting that they were kind of bringing up how Joseph doesn't know why Jacob hasn't come for him.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, like, man, I would feel the same way if I thought my dad loved me so much. Why hasn't he come and gotten me? Especially if you're 17. I know he's probably old enough to know, but still, there's always that itching in the back of your head telling you, like, why hasn't your dad come for you? Why isn't he saving me? Why is God letting me go through this? And what Mark was saying, how he has relationship with God really brought him through that situation, because there's no way anything else did. Being in prison, dad's not coming to save me. So God, there is a God, and I know history of my family, and I know God's got something in plan for us.
Yeah.
So I like how how Brent mentions in the movie Rogue One,
Yeah.
the main character hasn't seen her dad in 15 years, and she says that when they're looking for her dad, she says that she likes to imagine that he's dead, because I think that thinking that he is alive and not looking for her hurts her more than thinking that he's dead.
Yeah, I thought that was cool.
Because I know that would hurt me more if I thought my dad was alive and not coming for me.
Yeah.
So the next time, like we said earlier, the next time his brothers come to Egypt, they're coming for food. And then Joseph wants to see this other brother that they're talking about. And I was thinking, could he be thinking that something could have happened to Benjamin because he's the other brother of Rachel?
Yeah,
could they have done something to my little brother because they did something to me?
Yeah,
so it's almost like the revenge hinges on this moment. Like if my little brother is dead, you guys are screwed. Like maybe, I don't know. That's just what I'm thinking from my perspective if I was sitting in his seat.
Yeah.
In chapter 41, when he names his son, it says, before the years of the famine, 2 sons were born to Joseph. He gives the name of it, but the name of his first son was, it is because God has made me forget all the trouble of my father's house. So through all of this, through all the trouble that he had with his father's house, God has allowed him to be able to move on and let go of, and be able to move on. And then in his second son, he says, because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. So he's been able to let go of what happened and move on. And then the 7 years of the famine happened. So we were talking about, what would Joseph be feeling? How long would he held on to that? And how long would he be thinking about his dad? Well, I think after about a year or so in the things that he was struggling with, you start to let go on, you let go of the past. I mean, it's in the back of your mind, but then you just got to move on with your life and keep going. And it was definitely life defining, life changing, but you got to keep going and you just kind of move on. And then, that definitely shows up there with a naming of his 2 sons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in Genesis chapter 43 is where we're picking up scripture-wise. It says, now the famine was still severe in the land, so when they had eaten all the grain they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, go back and buy us a little more food. But Judah said to him, the man warned us solemnly, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. So Joseph really wants to see his brother. If you will send our brother along with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we will not go down, because the man said to us, you will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. Israel asked, why did you bring this trouble on me by telling the man you had another brother? They replied, the man questioned us closely about ourselves and our family. Is your father still living? He asked. Do you have another brother? We simply answered his questions. How are we to know? He would say, bring your brother down here. Then Judah said to Israel, his father, send the boy along with me, and we will go at once, so that we and you and our children may live and not die. I myself will guarantee his safety. You can hold me personally responsible for him. If I do not bring him back to you and set him here before you, I will bear the blame before you all my life. As it is, if we had not delayed, we could not have gone and returned twice, or we could now have gone and turned twice. And in that situation, Reuben was trying to take care of it himself, because, like they were saying, he was supposed to be the Behor, and he offers up his 2 sons to Jacob in payment for sending the youngest brother, and Jacob refuses. And they did bring up an interesting point, how it flips from Jacob to Israel.
Yeah,
so in the one chapter, he's acting like his old self, Jacob, and then when he kind of comes around, now he's Israel again. It reminded me of Peter, being called Simon at the end. And then, Jesus is like, do you love me? And he calls him Peter again later. So that kind of reminded me of that. But I was listening to this and I was thinking about how last time we kind of talked about why is Jesus known as the Lion of Judah, if Judah was such a crappy person in this chapter with Tamar. But he redeems himself by offering himself up for his entire family.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, what a Jesus move to do. Even though Jesus was never in a situation like that with his daughter-in-law, obviously. But Judah learned righteousness from that situation rather than becoming a crappier person because of it. He learned from it and became a righteous person. And gives himself for his whole family. So I thought that was when I heard that part, thinking about why Jesus was called the Lion of Judah, I was blown away.
Yeah, I think it's a great lesson of redemption. Because sometimes we have a hard time getting past our past, our own guilt keeps us there, or other people keep us there. And sometimes we just have a hard time seeing ourselves redeemed or getting beyond what we've always done. We always, I'm going to screw it up anyway. It's kind of our thought pattern. And I mean, Judah, he made a big mess as anybody could ever make. And yet in the end, he redeems himself. And I think that's a good lesson for us to realize we are not victims of our own past. We can also be redeemed.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, what is it you always say, Mark? Problem with Judas is, he didn't wait 3 days.
Yeah.
He got too big of a hurry.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Who knows what Judas would have done? Maybe he might have been, one of the first of the 12 and not the last, or the one that we refer to as the one who betrayed Jesus.
Yeah. He could have been there when the rock was rolled away.
They all did. And Peter, they had one, denied him 3 times. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how Judah, this is kind of the flip side of him betraying his brother Joseph. Now he's offering himself up to go save his family rather than, killing his little brother or getting rid of his little brother to justify his own means. What were you going to say, Mark?
No, I agree. I was agreeing.
So I like how it goes through and he talks about, Joseph being a part of Abraham's family in this situation where he could have been a member of Pharaoh's family and done whatever he wanted. But he cast that aside and took up Abraham's side so that his brothers would live rather than betraying them and avenging himself from when he was younger. And I kept thinking about, they talk more about it later about shalom versus empire, but I was thinking about revenge versus shalom. In this situation, he had a perfect opportunity to get revenge. Nobody's going to stop him. He can do whatever he wants. He's in a supreme position of power, and there's no way they can. Who are they going to petition to? Pharaoh? Like, Pharaoh doesn't care. He's like, this guy's Joseph. This guy's my man. So it's just really inspiring to see him trust the story and not give in to what Cain gave into when he killed his brother Abel, but he turned it around. So it's even going off of that, it's almost like, is this another chiasm in there somewhere? Because Cain kills Abel, Joseph forgives his family. It's like the flip side of that coin. And I'm not going to go through and look for it, but I'm
Yeah,
sure
a long
somebody
way.
has somewhere. Yeah.
Well, it's probably
like how
a never-ending story. We'll see that being replayed over and over in history, where some people will make a choice to go the way of Cain, and other people make the choice to go the way of Abraham.
Yeah.
We'll see it later when Moses has a choice of being in Pharaoh's family or being in Abraham's family. 400 years from now.
Yeah. Yeah, whenever Moses is watching his fellow Jews or his fellow Hebrews getting beaten, and he kills that guard.
Yeah.
That's a total Cain move. And then of course he runs away, just like Jacob and Judah and everybody else who does something wrong. But then he comes back.
Yeah.
So you guys have any other comments on this before we wrap it up and move on to Exodus next week?
I did love the part where he kept talking about the Benjamin Judah thing.
Yeah.
At the end where he's talking about how Benjamin and Judah and Judah and Benjamin, I thought that was really cool. I was like, oh man, I want to go read more about that. That's really, really.
You talking about like how David and Jonathan
yeah,
are descendants of Judah and Benjamin respectively?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really cool. I wonder how many times that flips back and forth. A descendant of Judah saves a descendant of Benjamin and vice versa.
Right. It did make me think about Paul in the Bible. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. And I was just thinking, it just dawned on me just as we were on this thing. Oh, his name was Saul also. Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, I always thought about that, how much pride that would have given Paul to be named after the first king. So not only is he smart, he's very learned, but he's also named after the first king of Israel.
Right. And again,
maybe
God. Go ahead.
I was just saying, maybe that's why Jesus renamed him, because you're not like Saul.
Right. I was just thinking maybe God was using that. Like, is that intentional? His name was Saul. There was a Saul. He was a king. He was messed up. I'm going to use this guy, Saul, to go and, reach the Gentile world.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Man, the Bible's pretty awesome.
Yeah. It is cool. I'm enjoying